Hi all, welcome to something completely different from me. This is me talking my thoughts and feedback regarding the European Super League. I've been spending pretty much the last 24 hours kind of digesting everything in and just kind of seeing what people were saying. Like I expected the majority were always going to be negative, and the minority that was kind of trying to stand for it, genuinely I feel are just trying to create the attention to be funny and they don't truly understand what this means for football. So I thought I'd give it a viewpoint from myself as a not just as a fan of a small club, but what I would see someone looking in like what it means. So I thought, welcome to do that, folks. So welcome to Smash Links on this sub to channel. If you are new, follow me on Twitter, G is a legend. All links are down below for posting the channel and social media links as always. And I thought I'd just kind of break everything down. If it takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it takes. I thought just break it all down. So basically, I thought do it in parts. Straight off, the European Super League, if you follow the pre-season stuff that they do, like these teams, whether it be Arsenal, Chelsea, whoever it may be, what you always find is a lot of these teams play in these pre-season tournaments where it's over-exaggerated to be like, oh, it's a big trophy to win, rather than it's more important to win this than your league or Europe or whatever. Like, and it's like the Intercontinental Cup, and it's basically what this is going to be. They're trying to repackage it because they've done it for so many years. Where, say, Manchester United or whoever, you play one game in America, you then play one game in, say, Hong Kong or Thailand, or you then play one game maybe in somewhere else in Asia, maybe like Dubai or Saudi Arabia. Then you maybe play another game in the Americas, and then but you keep it. What you notice is they don't play in Europe. That's what you, unless it's a certain tournament that's maybe sponsored by a certain team. Like if it's been like the Audi Cup, for example, where it was Bayern, Spurs, and so forth. That is when you notice that it's the way these tournaments are designed is to target areas of like populations where you know that the fans have maybe been a fan maybe for like 5 minutes. They don't really know the history of the club, where Manchester United or a Liverpool or a Spurs or an AC Milan, for what their pedigree is over, say, the last 100 years, 120 years. And the owners that are coming in, they don't care about the history either. They're multi-billionaires. Like Arsenal's owned by Stan Kroenke. He owns sport clubs in like America. He just wants to win, and most of the people that are involved have affiliations to other sports clubs in America. Kroenke's got like is it like Henry Glaziers. That's all they're interested in. Even the folk that own Milan, the Elite Management Corporation, they own Waterstones. They're an investment firm. They don't care about the football club. If they know that they can make as much money out of the club as possible, then they'll do it. Because Milan, talking on Milan, it was under Berlusconi. He was just proud to own them because it was his like his city, and he just wanted to make them like the best in Europe. He achieved all that, won the leagues, won Europe. Yes, it cost a lot of money, and then he sold to Chinese group that took over, and they tried even harder to try and achieve what under Berlusconi, and now the Elite Management Corporation have came in and tried to do that. Atletico's Gilmarin, Idan Ofer, and Cerezo, they own pretty much the 100%. Well, it's 99%. It's like 1% fan private owners. Barca and Real are fan owned, or so I've dug around. They've got a president, so it's almost like what the German model is in a sense, whereas the fans own the higher majority. But I think in maybe Spanish case, who knows? Like it would be good to properly down. I'm sure there is when you dig deep and further. Juventus is the Agnelli family, Inter is the Suning group, and with Inter, it is worth noting, with the Suning group, they own Jiangsu Suning, who had won the Chinese Super League in 2020. And because of how much money that they were basically throwing at the football club, not just the men's team, but like the women's team and so forth, they were throwing so much money that eventually they felt we've had enough. And they're trying to do basically the same with Inter. They're trying to find buyers and there's been like Saudi investment groups, Qatari investment groups, other investors looked at it, other like even American investment firms, they're looking at Inter, and I almost feel like the Suning Group are almost looking this as like their last hurrah to say, right, let's get the money from this European Super League and get out. So it's almost like recoup their money now and get out. Spurs is Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis. Glazers is Man United. They've had so much trouble in the past. If you read into how they managed to get Man United, which is because of JP Magner, John Magner, JP McManus, and Alex Ferguson, to do with the whole racehorse situation. It's a very good listen. It's like I think there's books on it as well, and it just kind of shows the state of how that came about. Manchester City is obviously Sheikh Mansour, who bought from Thaksin Shinawatra, and it just developed from there. But they've obviously put a lot of money into getting the community established, and fair play to them. They've done really well. The effort seems to be there, but maybe not. There's as with anything, there's more that can be done. Went to see with the Glazers as well that they've obviously put a lot of money into trying to get other sports teams better than they are, because it's end of the day they don't really care. They just want to make money. And no offence with Man United, they're straddled with so much debt. Same with Inter, same with Barca, same with Real, same with pretty much all these clubs. Unless the owners suddenly say, "I will wipe the debt off." And until that happens, these clubs are all straddled with debt. The £400 million or £350 million that you would earn just for participating, being a founder member, suddenly wipes out good chunks of the debt. But in Real, Barca's, Atletico's case especially, it doesn't. It doesn't even scratch the surface, I'm afraid. Liverpool, a lot of their debts are actually owed to like Royal Bank of Scotland and other banks and financial institutions. John Henry owns them. When Hicks and Gillette were owning, it was like, I think when I was doing my research, I'm sure it was like an hour they had left on the deadline to sell to Henry, or it was like the banks were saying, we're taking the club and all your assets. And I think at the time it was like £700-800 million of debt or something is what they had. And obviously Henry owns other football clubs and other things in America, but he has absolutely no interest. You can tell in his body language, it oozes he does not care. Like, it's so obvious. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, I'm afraid, to work that one out. He just wants as much money as he can, which is a bit of a shame. Because like you don't buy a football, you shouldn't be buying a football club just to make money. You should be buying into its history. You should be buying into its prestige, and you should be buying into the ethos and the message of the football club. Chelsea's been owned by Roman Abramovich for nearly 20 years, but he's built up. Yes, he's put a lot of money into the football club to make them successful. Yes, he's been trigger happy with managers, but he's built up a successful women's team as well, so fair play on that. And yes, he's been putting a lot of money to try and make the football club be the best it is, but there is an American influence in Bruce Buck that some people always forget, but he's part of what his mentality is, what's kind of initiated this. And obviously the Cronkies with the American influence, they like hunting, and that always gets brought up a lot. And also like you never see them at football games, like, and they're another sadly family that when you hear what they say, like, I'm surprised that fans can actually even remotely buy into it. And you can years ago Usmanov tried to buy the outright stake and it never materialised. Who knows, things might have been different then. And also Everton's owner, I can't remember his name now, that's annoying. He this is just came off the top of my head. He tried with Usmanov to try and get Arsenal, and it never materialised. And then when you do further digging, like Wolves, Leipzig, Bayern, basically the whole German model, Portuguese, Belgian, Turkish, a lot of them just do not approve of what's going on here. And basically these 12, when you dig down into like Deloitte, their history, like in Spurs' case, they've not won a European trophy for nearly 60 years. It was like 1963. United's not done anything really domestically for years since Ferguson's left. Yes, they've won a few trophies since then, but not as many as they probably would have expected. Liverpool have only just won the league, and yes, they've won a European trophy since, but it's a lot of things where you'd be saying to yourself, really, can you truly justify being seen as one of the big 12? Like Chelsea, yes, they've won Europa League and Champions League. Europa League twice and Champions League, but in the last decade. But do you really want to throw that all away? Arsenal have made the final on a few occasions for Champions League, Europa League, but over the last 15 years, and the league form is what's been laughable. But they've obviously won the FA Cup a few times, but its continental form is what sometimes gets made a laugh and joke at. Same with Spurs as well. Inter not been relevant in Europe for a decade, since they've done the treble under Mourinho. Real Madrid have obviously won it 13 times. The European Cup, Champions League, and Juve's not won it for 20 odd years. Barcelona haven't won it in 7 years or whatever. Atletico made the final a few times. They haven't really done a European trophy for a number of years. Milan's not been relevant in Europe for 10, 12 years, since they were practically when they won it twice in the 2000s. But this is what a lot of these teams forget. The pedigree currently isn't really, yes, teams in Portugal or Turkey or Belgium or even other teams in England. It is worth noting, Leicester, West Ham have been competitive this season. Everton, Southampton, Wolves have been competitive not only this season but in recent seasons. It's like Leicester when they won the league in Britain, in the Premiership, even Premier League. It showed that a smaller team that would be deemed, they'll never win it, but they did. They were able to take advantage of the situation, and everything kind of clicked in their way. It was when you look at it deep down, yes, there was things going on among all the big teams. Leicester were just the team to adapt to it best and showed how to make things work and win the league. In Spain, Real, Atletico and Barca have kind of dominated the league for so many years. Sevilla, Valencia, Deportivo in the last 20 years have tried to kind of break through. Sevilla's really trying this year. They're just outside the top three. They could still sneak in, but they've been consistent in the Europa League, winning it a number of times, and that's some record to be said over the last 10-15 years. Milan have been a mid-table side in Italy, really, in essence, but this is their first year in a number of seasons where they've actually been competitive. Juve have obviously done 9 in a row, and this is kind of the one year that they slip up. But it's their own fault, is what it is, and that's how Inter came in this season to try and win the league. But you've got Atalanta, you have Lazio, you have Roma competing up with the likes of Juventus, Milan, Inter. So it's not just 3 teams suddenly dominating the league. You've suddenly got 6 or 7. It's the same in England. France this season has been 4. Lille, PSG, Monaco, Lyon, Marseille, Montpellier, Rennes, Lens have all been competitive, but they've either fallen away or just not been as consistent as the big 4 this year. And Germany's been very interesting, been very topsy-turvy with Bayern, Leipzig, Wolfsburg, Frankfurt, Dortmund, Mönchengladbach. It's been great to watch, and this is what people forget, and this is not just current fans, even some past fans and the fans in the future. They will never truly understand, a lot of these leagues, as much as I'm a Hibernian fan, and I've had to live with Rangers and Celtic dominating the league for the best part of the last century, but in that time, Hibernian in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, even the 70s, had a team that competed with Rangers and Celtic, where they won the league. They made the European Cup in the very first year. They got to the semi-finals. They played Reims, who were one of the best teams at the time, and Reims handily beat Hibs, and Reims got through to the first final to Real Madrid when Real Madrid won the first 5 in a row. But Hibs were able to be in the first European Cup made a very good representation of themselves, even though at the time Chelsea and Aberdeen and other teams in England and Scotland were like, oh, we're not going to do it. But Hibs said we can do it, and they had actually been in Brazil and kind of very at the forefront of football at the time. They were kind of very revolutionary at the time in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s. But in the 60s and 70s, they were still competitive in Europe. They had some historic nights that my dad is very proud of when he's been able to go to the European games and even big league games and say those were special memories. And that's what current generation, I feel, or even the future generation, and even these owners just don't want to care about. They don't care about the memories that the past created or the present. Like as a present Hibernian fan, I have seen Hibs make the Scottish Cup final 3 times, the League Cup final 3 times, and I've seen us won it in 2007. We should have won it in 2004. We should have won it in 2016, but I've seen us win the Scottish Cup in 2016. We made the final back-to-back in 12 and 13. Yes, 12 was a disaster and 13 was 4 finals we made, because it was 2001 when we played a very all-conquering Celtic squad in 2001, and we were the third best team in Scotland at the time and even competed with the top 2 that season. We were going head to head with Celtic and Rangers, and we just kind of faded off. But that was a period where 16, when we won that Scottish Cup, it meant so much, not just to me as a Hibs fan, but the 150,000 plus that attended the parade on the Sunday afternoon through Edinburgh, where it was green and white. It was unbelievable to see, and seeing over 150,000 people getting to see their team. And we had been 114 years where we hadn't won it, and there was people that had been to the finals, the 3 previous in previous years, and even teams where the great teams in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s had never achieved it. And even like my family members were of the mindset, and even people that I know that are in like their 90s, and there was a gentleman that was in his hundreds, late 90s, early hundreds, and he was someone that had never seen Hibs win the Scottish Cup, and he thought, am I ever going to see it? And luckily he managed to see it, and his story was kind of reverberated around not just Scottish media, but like British, and even I'd seen it in Australia and the Americas. And it just shows that these 12 clubs, if they are using it as leverage to say, right, this is what we want, like, end of the day, you're making so much money from being in Europe anyway. Like, the European Super League, if you want to do what they're going to do, if I'm honest, do it during pre-season. Use this as a pre-season tournament and say, right, we're going to have from June and July, make it June and July, because it gives enough time to use May as a recovery time, and you make sure you make it like a month long then, if you're really this desperate to do it, and you say, right, you put these 12 teams and they play each other home and away, or not even home and away, but you put in, they're so-called desirable venues, as it were. They'll probably be in like America and Australia and like Hong Kong or Asia, like Korea, for example, and Japan. They'll put in countries where it's going to attract the greatest population to attend, so they can make as much money as possible. If you're really that desperate to do it, put in these countries, because, and then like, you don't need to do relegation promotion. Just have these. If these 12 teams want to do their own thing, just make that happen then. But don't say, right, we're going to have our own tournament during the midweek, and we're going to say, right, we can still do this, but we're going to still do our domestic league and cups, but we don't really care about them, we only care about this. Like, really? If I was the football club and my fans, I'd be like, if I'm competing in domestic tournament and a continental competition, I want as best a chance as possible at winning everything. That's what you want, because it's worth noting as well, if you put all your eggs in one basket, which in this case they are for this, then you could end up with a disaster in domestically, where you suddenly start to go down the divisions, and because a lot of these clubs are on the stock exchange, your financial returns get affected, because you are like shareholders will be like, oh, that's not very attractive, so I'm going to pull out my money. And same for the fans. If any of the fans that stay invested in the club, whether it be through merchandise, through season tickets, they'll be like, I'm not going to support the club, why should I? I'm not giving them my money. And as the club becomes less attractive, the owners that own them will then be like, oh, what do I do? Suddenly, and then if the TV networks that get involved realise this as well, you then start to say, right, well, where else can you get money from? And that's when you then end up trying to sell to someone else that's maybe going to buy into this European Super League idea. But if, say, a Manchester United suddenly in League One or the National League, then you say to yourself, am I really that interested? Or if Juventus is suddenly in Serie C or Serie D, you say to yourself, do I really want to invest in this club? And then suddenly the European Super League dies because of the interest of the, not just of the competition, because it's like a midweek thing, but you then have people that are the fans not attending games. You have the TV networks not interested because the best players are no longer involved, because they might suddenly be at Bayern Munich or a West Ham or a Celtic or a Ghent or a Fenerbahce. You never know where they could be depending on how things play out in, say, 2-3 seasons, depending, or 5 seasons, or 10, depending on the situation as the years progress, if this was to play out. But you then have all these owners potentially, even though they've maybe earned so much initially, they could potentially be hemorrhaging as much money as well. And there's always two sides of the coin with everything. And this is what these owners, it's like you're making the initial quick buck, but the damage over the long term will not be, in essence, financially worth it. Because, like, for Manchester United, for example, I believe it's like £4 billion if people want to try and buy it. And that was like the Qatari investment firm, I think, that own beIN Sports. If they've tried and failed, then if you suddenly lose all that money, and there's also a fear as well that these football clubs, the owners might say, I've had enough of that plaything, and just say, I'm going to close up the club. And because it's basically an American style model where there's no promotion, no relegation, if first maybe gets, say, we'll just say collectively £1 billion for the season, 12th maybe gets 500 million, but in between it's maybe like, say, £25 million increments by the time you eventually get to £1 billion. So even though you're making, say, minimum £500 million a season, and that could be, say, for 2 or 3 seasons, the money itself might dry up because of the interest. And that's what people, not just the fans, but the owners and the club themselves have to understand. And the clubs themselves, if UEFA, FIFA are trying to piece together, say, right, you're not part of the European Club Association, or you're not part of this organisation, then it's where we would say, right, you can't be involved in this. And clubs and players might say, right, well, I don't want to be part of this team, I'll get a transfer to this club because it's not affected, and I can play my European competitions or my national team or whatever. And if you've suddenly got players that, if, say, in Barcelona's case, if you suddenly got, say, 500 or 600 million pounds worth of players and suddenly they were to all go out the door, then you've then suddenly got to find that 500 or 600 million pounds to reinvest into a fresh squad. But if, say, nobody wants to join, then you suddenly may have no team. So then suddenly you finish bottom of the 12 or 15, depending on whatever system they implement. But realistically, the Champions League itself is fine. Europa League itself is fine. They even have the Conference League. Realistically, all that needs changed, if I was honest, with all of the tournaments, it shouldn't be top 4 for England, Spain, Germany, France and Italy. Or I think it's top 3 for France and Germany, because of not just because of the coefficient, but because of how the rankings will work, and also the league numbers, I think as well. It should just be top 2, so champions and runners up. So it's that way you get, from the top 5 it's 10 teams, and then your other 22 teams will maybe be made up of other champions that have qualified, so like Ajax for Eredivisie, depending who wins in Belgium, then Turkey, then Scotland, you'd have Rangers and so forth. So you'd you'd still have qualifiers, but your teams that are like third, fourth would be in the Europa League, and then your teams in fifth and sixth would be in the Conference League. But you'd obviously have your cup winners in where they need to be. Maybe this is why they should maybe look at bringing back Cup Winners' Cup again, like they used to have. So all the cup winners, like the FA, then you would see a different tournament. But the problem is is the runners-up or the cup winner may not be in that top six, so that you then have to say, right, who gets the spot. That might then fall to, say, 7th in the league, or in, say, England in the Carabao Cup case, you might then say, Brentford, you get that European spot because you finished in the semi-final, and because of how Manchester United, Manchester City and Tottenham are all in European spots, you get that European spot. You never know. Things like that. It's people, you sometimes have to maybe look back to the past to implement stuff in the future. You just have to slightly tweak it. Because I'm quite excited about how the Conference League and the Europa League will work next season, because I think they've kind of got the numbers about right. And if it is it should be 32, 32, 32. Yes, there's a lot of qualifying that's done. And sometimes you do get small teams going to run. You've had like Apple Nicosia, Basel, Wolfsburg, and Monaco. Europa League, you've had Shakhtar Donetsk, Roma, Villarreal, Braga, Espanyol, Sevilla. Trying to remember who else has had good runs over the years. Rangers have had good runs. Mentioned Villarreal, Celtic. Who else? Ajax have had runs in Champions League and Europa League, and that's what people, not just the owners but fans, forget, that some teams, you get not just one team, but you do get the odd team that does go a run to like the semi-finals or the final, and you say to yourself, how are they doing it? And sometimes it might just be the team, it could be the tactics, could be the draw. And I would rather, I know for Hibernian, if we get third in the league this season, and depending how the Scottish Cup plays out, we would be in the playoff round. If we get in the playoff round for the Europa League, we know at least we have the drop back of being in the Conference League group stage, and we would have European football to Christmas at least. Like, depending who we got in the playoff round, there could be a chance we might even have football till after Christmas, depending how things play out. That, for me, is unbelievable and unheard of for Hibs. But I'd be absolutely excited to see how that plays out. And I'm excited to see how Rangers do in the group, because they are building a team that's shown in the league to be competitive, but it's also shown in Europe the last couple of seasons under Gerrard to be competitive. And it's definitely, maybe even with a bit more money, they might be a challenge to, say, some of these bigger teams. They might go to, say, AC Milan and, say, the Champions League. Say their group was AC Milan, Wolfsburg, and we'll say Sevilla. We'll say that's the group. And say Rangers were to beat Sevilla at home but lose away. They were to beat Wolfsburg home and away, and say get 2 draws against Milan, but they were to finish second in their group. People then be like, oh, Rangers, what are they doing? And if people forget all these kind of things, like small teams are allowed the opportunity to try and challenge. It's like 30 years ago when the European Cup became the Champions League. It was a whole rebranding. Football was under so much revolutionary change, because tournaments were suddenly being scrapped or rebranded and reinvented to suit, as it were. It's like when the Premier League was the old First Division and became the Premier League. Yes, you still had promotion and relegation, but you still had a lot more TV money coming in to make it happen. What the ESL is kind of in essence doing is saying no competition. It's like anti-competition, where it's 12 teams or however many is actually going to be in it once they finally decided. But if there's no promotion or relegation, it's like, if honest, what are you there for? Like, if you win it, like, what are you actually winning? That's what the problem is. If you finish last, what are you? You're not really getting anything out of it. You're just being like, oh, we're last, I will just go again next season. You don't want that mentality. Like, if I was in a competition, I want to be either winning it or at least being as presentable as possible. Like, you taking part is great, but you want to at least look respectable. Like, I remember years ago, a few seasons ago, you see teams, and you get some of the small teams, they get put in the group of death for the Champions League or the Europa League, and you say to yourself, they'll never get a point. I remember the season Dundalk had Zenit, I think it was Zenit, AZ Alkmaar, and I think it was Maccabi Tel Aviv or something. I think it was. It was a hard group, and they could have almost qualified from that group. I think they were really unlucky, and that's a small team in Ireland that people would just laugh at, saying, "Oh, how have that team qualified for Europe?" But they did. They worked hard, and they created so much history. It was like the same with Shamrock Rovers under Michael O'Neill. They done well. And Östersunds in Sweden, when they got to the last 32, a small team in Sweden that's unheard of, but they got from the 4th tier to the top tier, and that's how Graham Potter's now at Brighton because of what he did at Östersunds. And there's stories that develop, and you don't want to take away the memories of the past and the present. And because people in the future will be like, what was football like 30 years ago? What was football like 60 years ago? Like, for me, I've grown up of a generation of Zidane, Ronaldinho, Kaká, Michael Owen, Messi, Ronaldo. Even in, like, say, the 90s, I can still say like Rivaldo, Romario, Papan, and for like me, from a Hibs view, I would say Frank Soze has been someone that I've been blessed to see. But then, like, for like my parents and older generation, for them, they've seen from Pele to George Best, Dennis Law, Bobby Charlton, the Busby Babes, Liverpool through the 60s and 70s with Dalglish and Ian St John and Emlyn Hughes, and you've got Graham Souness and Alan Hansen, and like the Celtic team was the Lisbon Lions, and or depending if you're Celtic Rangers, you've had or Hibs, it's like the famous five and the Iron Curtain. There's like every football club and country over, like, say, the last 60, 70, 80, 100 years have had like defining periods of like their clubs where they've said this was a great period to be a football fan. Even now, like the small, like the grassroots, like for me, I've enjoyed watching like Edinburgh City and Spartan, for example, from a local view, because it's great to see the small teams try and get a chance to work up the footballing pyramid. Like, Scottish football's got its flaws, but it's got its positives as well, and I hope that can finally improve itself, get maybe back to the old days of like 18 teams in each division, because 4 times a season is quite tedious for fans. That's when things like that would need revolutionised. Like, every league has its flaws and its strengths, and like the European Super League is just not positive. If I'm honest, if you're really going to do something like this, it should be a pre-season tournament. If I was honest, I would do this in the seasons where there's no Copa America, no what do you call it, World Cup, Euros, Confederations Cup, anything like any tournament. Like, make this like make it worth something. Then, if they're really that desperate, do it in a pre-season. Where you say, right, you maybe, and you make it like an invite-only tournament then, if it's these 12, or you'd maybe then go to 16, you say, right, these are the 16 best teams that are going to play out for the European Super League. Yes, UEFA and FIFA have tried to do like an advanced FIFA Club World Cup, and UEFA's tried to do an advanced Champions League, but this idea, like the 12, I don't like. In reality, if you were to do 4 more teams, who, like, realistically, you'd have to add Bayern, PSG, Dortmund, and in reality, then it's like you'd maybe then take out like Arsenal and Spurs, and then put in, say, Lyon, Lille, Ajax, Sevilla, Atalanta. You'd have to give those. You'd have to almost decide where the spots go, but there's it needs serious rethink. Like, that's why there's so much damnation about it. Yeah, I mean, I've seen posts saying like, "Oh yes, the Super League. Oh, we'll play, the big teams will play each other." The novelty wears out after about if these 12 are all in one group or two groups, whatever it may be, if it's 15, 20 teams, whatever, the novelty wears out after a season. Like, Arsenal have been embarrassed enough times over the years by the likes of Bayern and Barcelona. It becomes laughable, even domestically, if they get embarrassed by like Man United or Chelsea. It becomes laughable. You see, it's like, I don't want it, and the fans don't want to go through it, and I don't think the players want to go through it. So, like, the owners shouldn't be thinking about that either. But they'll be like, "Oh, we'll just go again next week." I'm like, no. Like, if you get hammered in the continental competition, like domestically, you feel like, do I really see the point in that either? But I just honestly do not know. Like, I feel like there is a window for it to be done in a pre-season window, but you do it when it's not clashing with, as I said, continental, like Confederations Cup, World Cup, Euros, Copa America, African Cup of Nations. Make it where you want to make it. If you want to make it worth something, like that's why they've tried to do all these pre-season tournaments the way they do, and this is why they feel like they can now do it at like a global through the season model, and it doesn't work. It will not work. Like, it needs to be condensed, and you could easily get it done over a month, 6 weeks with 16 teams if you're doing it like a knockout tournament, or like groups of like 4 groups of 4, and like the winners go through or top 2 go through. There is ways that you can do it. It's like a case of rethink it. Like, and what annoys me is like fans or players or pundits or ex-pros or whoever it may be, what you find is when they're the ones that will sit down and say, we can think of this idea better than you have, how to make it work, yet the owners don't see it that way. They just rather see the pound signs or the dollar signs, and like the fans are be like, we've come up with this way of doing it and it works, and this will not, like, in my opinion, I don't see this working. That's why if I'm honest, British clubs, the Italian clubs, and even the Spanish clubs need to follow the 50+1 model in Germany, where the fans own the majority stake in and anyone that's like a corporation. Like, that's how Red Bull are trying to work around the 50+1 model, even to an extent Hoffenheim as well, and that's why there was protests, and that's why they're not liked. But it's where they need to kind of say, right, British clubs need to get the British fans on, like your Arsenal fans, your Chelsea fans. I bet there's enough in Britain alone that support like Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, City, Man United, Spurs, probably with enough like fan, ex-pros, whatever, that collectively they could fund a takeover. They probably could with a bit of luck, even the current players as well. But who knows? There's going to be a revolution in football regardless between now, and it never helps as well with it being a global pandemic. This is being now because obviously everything's starting to come out and it's coming near the end of another season. But I genuinely do not know what could happen. I hope this doesn't happen. If there's going to be reform in football, it needs to be a positive one, not a negative one, because this is what this is going to be. And if I'm honest, all I'll stick to watching is Hibs in the Scottish Premiership, if they're still in that, and then I'll still watch my local teams in Scotland, in like east of Scotland. I'd rather just stick with that, and I'll be happy. I wouldn't care what goes on in another league. And you want to still be engaged in football, but my engagement in football will sadly change, and I'm sure others will feel the same. But I've rambled on for nearly 40 minutes, and you may have understood what I've said, you may have not. I can fully understand. I've tried to be as clear, as concise, and just try to cover as many different points as possible. But let me know your thoughts on the European Super League. I'd imagine a lot of people are against it, and I'm sure there'll be some for it, but you can't please everyone. I'm definitely against it, but I thought I'd at least cover both sides of the argument just to at least explain pros and cons, as it were, so that way it's balanced and not just kind of being all against. But I'm not 90, I'm 100% like against it anyways. But you're welcome to smash the likes as always, sub to channel if you're new, follow me on Twitter at GLegend, and I will catch you all later folks for more content on the channel.